show about Jewish books, music, film, and web. I'm Heidi Estrin. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida. Additional support comes from the Association of Jewish Libraries. The Sydney Taylor Manuscript Award is presented each year by the Association of Jewish Libraries to the author of an unpublished Jewish manuscript for children. During the 2009 AJL convention, I had the opportunity to speak first to Aileen Grossberg, chair of the Manuscript Award Committee, and later to Nechama Liss Levinson, author of this year's winning manuscript. All right, we're in a cab, so if there's background noise, that's our excuse.
Okay.
So, Aileen Grossberg, chair of the Sydney Taylor Manuscript Committee. Tell us, first of all, about the committee and what's the difference between your committee and the Sydney Taylor Book Award Committee.
Okay. Our committee comes first. And literally it comes first because we look at unpublished manuscripts for ages 8 to 11, chapter books, and
Fiction, right?
Fiction, yes. Yes,
and the reason it's so specific is that this is Sydney Taylor legacy, and you're sort of emulating
exactly.
All of a Kind Family.
All of a Kind Family was basically aimed at that age range.
And because of the history of how the All of a Kind Family books were discovered through a publishing contest when they were unpublished manuscripts.
Exactly. So this kind of emulates the Sydney Taylor discovery process. Mm-hmm. And like Sydney Taylor, we have had several of the manuscript winners go on to be published.
Mm-hmm. And some of them have even won Sydney Taylor Book Awards.
That's
since
right.
Then. So
with name changes sometimes.
Right. But which means you did a great job picking a winner because we liked it twice.
Right. And we don't always award give an award to a manuscript because we really do look for things that are manuscripts that are going to be publishable.
Mm-hmm. So some years there just isn't anything.
Right. Much as we would like to encourage writers, we also want this award to stand for quality.
Yes. So this year you did have a winner, right?
Yes, we did.
Tell us about the winner.
The book is called When the Hurricane Came to New Orleans, and it's a contemporary novel featuring a young girl, Gertie, who lives in New Orleans with her family, and they evacuate. Hundreds and thousands of people did as the hurricane came, and they went to live with her relatives for an entire year, and Gertie goes through a lot of emotional torment and displacement as she adjusts to life in another place. But it's not just a story of a contemporary girl and Hurricane Katrina. It's also a story infused with Jewish values of family and tikkun olam and realization of what is really important. Mm-hmm. And it's not all the stuff that she left behind in New Orleans.
Right. Wow, well that's totally contemporary and very different from pretty much anything we've seen before, I think. Or can you, I mean, I haven't read it obviously because it's not available to the general public,
right.
But do you feel like it shares anything, does it remind you of any existing books? Does it build on any themes that are already out there, or is it truly unique as it sounds?
Well, I think one of the reasons that we liked it was because there aren't a whole lot of books in that age range with Jewish values that deal with contemporary events. They may deal with growing up, in the 2000s. They might deal with emotional problems, but to set it in an actual contemporary
Current
event is what makes this book stand out from others.
Okay. That's interesting, too, because right now it's so contemporary, and eventually that'll make it a historical novel.
That's right.
If it stands the test of time,
yes,
it'll become a historical novel.
We hope it actually will get into print.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm sure does the author.
Of course. And who is the author?
The author is Nechama Liss Levinson. She comes from Long Island. She's a psychotherapist who has always liked to write. In fact, she has published articles, and she has published previously a nonfiction book about death and mourning for children. Mm-hmm. I think she's very...
But since the contest is strictly for fiction in a certain age group, then that doesn't matter that she published this book.
Right. She fits right into this niche.
Yeah. What else should we know about the Manuscript Award that we don't know?
We've had some wonderful manuscripts over the years, books that we have fallen in love with, but haven't been able to award anything because they've been perhaps for young adults, or there hasn't been enough Jewish content, because that's very important. It has to have a positive Jewish content, but also appeal to the general reader.
Right. Yeah, the same thing
as
the Sydney
Taylor
Book Award Committee, right? And it faces the same issues that sometimes it's a great book, but it doesn't fit the criteria.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, we do have a lot in common.
Right.
The two Sydney Taylors.
Right. It's like sister committees.
Yes.
So it's very different for librarians to be reading unpolished manuscripts. Is it difficult to judge because that's we have many of us have experience with reviewing finished products, but this is a whole different thing, and you have to judge it differently, right? So,
to a certain extent, it's a really good question. We look for something that is fairly polished, and even though it's a manuscript, it should have gone through a self-editing process. Not be a first draft.
Right.
And you can tell when someone has. And since we're looking at a whole body of maybe 15 or 20 manuscripts for the season, the ones that show that polish generally rise to the top.
Yeah.
But I can think of very few that don't have some kernel in them of either originality or emotion or something that's appealing. And you can tell that every one of these manuscripts has been written with love and devotion and a lot of effort. That there are some wonderful writers out there and incubating writers.
Yeah.
They just need to, somebody has to see them and discover them.
And that's fun for you guys to be part of that discovery process.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we have discovered a few, I guess.
Yeah, since they got published after that.
Right.
And I'm sure that helped them to get published, the fact that they had this official seal of approval.
Right.
So it must influence the publishers.
Yes, we think it does.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Great. Thank you so much, Aileen.
Oh, you're welcome. And it's been nice sharing camp with you.
So, Nechama Liss
Levinson.
That's what I thought it was. Okay. So you are the author of a currently unpublished manuscript, which has just won the Sydney Taylor Manuscript Award. And tell us all about that book. And you're also a published author, I want to point out as well. We could talk about that too.
Okay.
But first tell us about this new exciting award-winning manuscript.
Okay, well, thank you for asking me. This book was written, it's called When the Hurricane Came to New Orleans, and it was written following volunteer work that I did as part of a group that went down to the ravaged Gulf Coast area immediately after the disaster of Hurricane Katrina. And what's, I think, a little different and interesting about this book is that it's written from the point of view of a 9-year-old girl, Gertie, from a Jewish family, and it's about how she and her family are evacuated from New Orleans immediately following the hurricane, what happens to them during the year that follows, and how she has to learn to deal with all the losses that she suffers and finds resilience and a way to cope and heal.
Now, you went down and volunteered after Katrina, and you were there in person helping out.
Yes, well, actually, I was very fortunate that very soon after Katrina, a rabbi who's very active in social justice, Rabbi Joel Safin, had organized a group of Jewish volunteers to go down during the December immediately following the storm, which was actually quite soon after the storm.
Right.
And my husband and I were fortunate enough to be able to be part of that. And we went down, and at that time, a lot of what we did was working on houses that had been ravaged by the storm, and a lot of it was either taking things out of houses, old sheetrock and terrible things, or also being able to put up new sheetrock in houses that had been destroyed.
And when you went, I'm sure you weren't thinking that you were doing book research.
Not at all.
So how did it end up turning into a book?
Well, when we went down, and we had previously gone on 2 habitat builds with Rabbi Safin, so we really went because of the extraordinary feeling of accomplishment and gratitude that we got from doing the other builds with him. this time when we went, in the evenings, we would meet different people who were in New Orleans, and we were particularly moved by the different stories of different families. There was one young Jewish family, a mom and dad and two little girls, who really stole our hearts with the verve of the little girls. And the dad was a police officer who was able to take us through the Ninth Ward and show us all that had happened. And their story in particular was very moving to me. And I couldn't get them out of my mind after we left. When we came back to New York, I spoke to the rabbi of our synagogue and said, can't we do something too? And he said, if you want to, do it. And I was able to organize a group of about 25 volunteers from our synagogue who went down that following March. Mm-hmm. And we worked down there and again met more people. And I began to feel a mission that I felt I could speak not by going down again, but by writing something that would reach many people.
Mm-hmm. Now, it seems like the books that you have already published and this book have sort of a common thread of dealing with difficult situations. So talk a little bit about your previously published books now.
Okay, well, I think you're absolutely right. My previously published books are nonfiction dealing with helping children to deal with loss, with death. My first published book was When a Grandparent Dies, a kid's own remembering workbook for dealing with Shiva and the year beyond. And I wrote that actually after my parents both died, very close together, and I had two little girls aged 4 and 7. And I felt that it was important that they be included in part of the process. When people came to pay a Shiva visit, I felt like sometimes people didn't seem to really realize that they too were suffering a loss. It wasn't just myself, but that they had suffered the loss of their grandparent. And so I wrote that book. Following that, a number of years later, I worked with a minister, Reverend Molly Finney-Basquette, and we wrote a book for Christian children on dealing with the loss of a grandparent. And then following that, our publisher, Skylight Paths, asked us if we would write a book on dealing with the death of a pet from a spiritual perspective, since so many people are so attached to their pets and are so devastated when a pet dies. But I think all of them are connected with the idea of loss and grieving, and I would say it's not coincidental. In my other life, not as a writer, I'm a psychologist, and I think issues of loss and grieving are really part of my everyday work.
So the writing is an extension of your professional life. It sort of takes it beyond what you can do personally one-on-one with a patient and shares it with everyone else.
Absolutely. You said it perfectly. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think that the books I wrote about death and dying are specifically books to help a child heal. Mm-hmm. But I think the manuscript about Katrina is also about healing and also about helping children both to become more empathic, more caring, to understand other children, and also to learn that part of the way to heal from loss is also to reach out and help others is part of the process.
Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful way to think about it. So I'm not that familiar with the contents of the death books, and obviously I haven't had a chance to read the manuscript. So that's common to all of them also, is that encouraging them to reach out and help others as the healing
Well, actually, it's interesting. In the books about death, which are workbooks that children can write stories, draw pictures, and interview people and all that, in each of those books there's a page that's called Remembering by Giving, which encourages children to either give to a charity in memory of a grandparent, a charity that a grandparent really would have liked or they feel a grandparent might have felt good about, or a charity that deals with helping older people or with a cause that's dear to their hearts. Or in the pet book also, I think we included also or volunteering to help out in some organization that helps pets or animals or, something in that vein. And I don't want to give away what happens, but Gertie, who's the heroine of When the hurricane came to New Orleans, also learns a way that amidst all of the loss, that there's a way that she can also help to change the world in a better way.
Now, with writing a Jewish one and then writing a Christian one, what was different and what was the same?
Actually, about a third of the book was almost exactly the same. Issues like, when did your tell us what happened when your grandparent died, how did you find out? Or putting in photographs, a photographic album, what you liked most about your grandparent, or a little complaints compartment on what your complaints were about them. About a third of the book had to be slightly changed.
Right.
For example, we had a Shiva detective in the Jewish book, which encouraged children to become active participants in the process by, during Shiva, becoming detectives and asking people questions like, how did you know my grandma? When did you meet? What did you do together? What was she like? Now, there is no Shiva in the Christian tradition, so we changed it was slightly to memory detectives.
But it's the same activity.
But it was the same activity, but a different description of how to go about doing it. And then about a third of the book was totally different, and most of that actually had to do with the various holidays throughout the year. So in the Jewish book, we talk about Hanukkah and Shabbat and different times that you might remember and how you might remember a grandparent, and also Yortzeit. While in the Christian book, and this is where the minister I worked with was particularly helpful, the holidays were obviously the Christian holidays of Easter and Christmas. In addition, in the Jewish mourning rituals, as I said, Shiva was described in detail, while in the Christian there was some description of a wake. Cremation is something which was described as a possibility in the Christian book, but not in the Jewish book.
And then the pet one, obviously there's no traditional rituals for dealing with the death of a pet, so that book must be much more different.
Well, that one is more different, and that one also did not come from a specific religious tradition, although we did want it to be a spiritual book, because children do wonder. For example, one of the most common questions I get when I've talked about even a grandparent dying, kids often will go to a pet very quickly and will say, do you think a dog has a soul? Do you think a dog goes to heaven? Did my cat go to heaven? What happened to my butterfly? So, so issues about having a soul and all that we do discuss in the pet book. In the pet book, we also deal with making a pet memorial. Nowadays, there are many pet memorials that can be done online, or little kind of shrine-like memorials that you could make in your house to think about your pet. We also give suggestions for different kinds of memorial services that someone might hold for after the death of a pet.
The pet book is just so unique. That's really intriguing to me. What kind of response have you gotten to it?
It's interesting. A lot of people, both children, teens, and adults, are so devoted to their pets and so completely devastated when a pet dies that they're very happy and grateful to have a book where they can really pour their heart out. One of the pages in the pet book is called It's Just a Pet, which is that many people say to a child when a pet dies, but it's just a pet. Like, you shouldn't be so upset, it's just a pet. And my belief and Reverend Beth Kett's belief is it's not just a pet. It was a dear friend. It was a beloved member of your family. That it's important to have a place where you can honor and remember this beloved part of your life.
Right. I'm going to get teary. It's always the pet books that get me.
Well, I think a lot of people feel that way. There's just a kind of unconscious connection that people have with a pet that is very moving. The pet does live with you. They often sleep with you. People don't feel judged by pets. They don't feel criticized by pets. And it's a real love affair.
Right. But tell us about how you were inspired to create the original grandparent book. Death book.
And so I will tell you two little stories. One is my younger daughter, Rivka, who was 4 at the time my father died of a heart attack. And one morning she woke up and said, "Mommy, my heart hurts. I think there's something wrong with my heart. We have to go to the doctor." And so that was one part, and we did go to the doctor to discuss how her heart hurt after my father had died. And the other thing that happened, my older daughter, during the Shiva, she was 7 years old, and we were sitting Shiva at my house, and she called me upstairs, and she had made a grandma museum when my mother died. And so during Shiva, she had taken all the little things that my mother had either made for her, like knitting her a blanket, or things she had given to her, and like doll clothes and books, and she put them all out on display in her room with little signs, and little signs of the things that her grandma Bubbles had made for her or given to her, and that was her grandma museum that she made during Shiva.
And she thought that up all by
And she
herself.
thought that up herself. And so those were the incidents that inspired me, that I felt that children really were being neglected in a way and needed this book.
Wow, that's great. Well, Nechama, thank you so much.
Well, this has been a delight and a pleasure speaking to you.
And I hope that your Katrina book will be published soon so everybody can read it.
From your mouth to God's ears and to a publisher's ears.
That's right. There are so many ways to connect with the Book of Life. Fan us at facebook.com/Book of Life Podcast. Follow us at twitter.com/Book of Life Pod. Email us at boooflifepodcast@gmail.com and listen to the latest episode by phone at 916-313-3820. And of course, find links to everything at bookoflifepodcast.com. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida at cbiboca.org and is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilachmakers Klezmer String Band at freilachmakers.com. Thanks for listening and happy reading.